Okay, so let's look at what happens. We want to figure out some angles and what's called related angles um, in this part of the course, which is day 2 of Unit 4 from the text. Yeah, Unit 4. So if you have a given point, so we're going to draw a terminal arm. So if I have a given point, let's say 2, -6, and I want to figure out what quadrant I'm in, I know you can just sketch it and figure it out, but let's come up with some generalizations here. 2, -6 will take me down to this quadrant here. And you notice that I have a positive x and a negative y. Well, anything with a positive x or a negative y will be down here in the fourth quadrant. So anything with both positive will be up here. If x is negative and y is positive, I end up in quadrant 2. To get down to quadrant 3, they both have to be negative. And then here, like I said, x is positive, y is negative. So what you do is we have these little triangles here. We make these little triangles here, and then we want to figure out for each of these triangles, we find out the sine and the cos and all that stuff. And then we have to figure out the how these are related really to the first quadrant. So if I have this angle here, so in the first quadrant I'm great, but let's go to the second quadrant. If I am looking at the triangle in the second quadrant and I make my triangle here, okay, and that's my little angle here. Well, to figure out what this is here, I get this, but to figure out what this is here, okay, what's remaining, okay, or what the angle is here. So if I have a terminal arm and I end up here and I want to know how do I get here, I make my triangle, I figure out this angle here, which I'll do in a second, and then to figure out what this angle is here, I take 180 and I subtract from it this theta that I came up with here. Okay, so what is down here? It's 180 subtract theta gets me that. Okay, and in the third quadrant, if I want to get down here, I go 180, and then this is my theta. I figure out my triangle here, and here's my theta, so I have 180 degrees, plus whatever I figure out theta is here, so I go 180 plus theta here to get to quadrant 3. In quadrant 4, I have my triangle. It's this little thing here. I use my trig ratios to figure out what theta is here, and then this whole thing is almost 360. It's 360 less this theta. So in the quadrants now, I have theta, I have 180 minus theta, 180 plus theta, and 360 minus theta. That's how I get, these are the related angle formulas. So this plus my 1, 2, 3, 4 I already have. Soon we'll have another one called the Cast law. You can also use this if you feel like it. Okay, this is plus plus, x's and y's are both positive. Here I have a minus and a plus. Okay, x is negative, y is positive. Here they're both negative, and here I have a positive and a negative. So these are what I'm talking about with points here. Okay, so equivalent to these guys here. Okay, so we'll play around with that a bit more. And what happens is when you look at things like this, if I said that cos alpha is equal to 5/12, okay, and it says here that I'm in quadrant 4. So what's the angle and what's the primary trig ratios if that's the case? Well, cos A is 5/12. So remember that cos is y over r. So I know that this is always positive, but I know that y is 5 in this case because it's y. No, so I'm sorry, cos is x over r. So I know that I'm positive 5 in the x here, so that's 5, and I know that this guy is 12. I don't know what my y is, so I have to figure out what y is. And to do that, I use Pythagorean Theorem. And when you're not looking for the hypotenuse, you take your two numbers and you subtract the smallest one squared from the biggest one. So it's 12 squared minus 5 squared. So this is the equivalent of c squared equals a squared minus b squared. So not looking for hypotenuse. No, I'm sorry. That's a squared is equal to c squared minus b squared. So when I have the hypotenuse already, I will subtract to find one of the other sides. And when I work this out, I'm going to leave this as the root of 119. You could figure that out. That's 10 point something. But I'll leave that as the root of 119. So that now is my y value. So if I want to figure out, so y value is root of 119. But if I know I'm in the fourth quadrant, I know I'm down here. I know that my y value has to actually be negative. So my y value is negative 119. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the fourth quadrant. So x is, so let's review this, sum it up. X is 5 here, r is 12, and I had y equal to negative root 119. So then when I go through and I say what's sine of alpha, or sine of a, I don't like keep saying alpha, sine of a, that's y over r, so that's negative 119, the root of negative 119 over 12. And then if I go tan a, that's y over x, and that is the root of 119 negative over 5. Okay, so those are the other trig ratios. Okay, we'll skip the next little bit, and then I really want to get on to this part here. If we look at this and I say to you, hey, let's figure out what's called a cast rule. We'll come up with a cast rule, and this is the cast rule, and we'll get to this in a second. But let's figure out what the deal is here. Cast is like this, and don't forget that we have sine is equal to y over r. I keep writing the same stuff. X over r, and tan is y over x. If I want to figure out quadrants, what signs these are in each quadrant, well, in this here I have both x and y are positive, so I know that everything is positive. So all my ratios are positive. Here I have negative x and positive y. Okay, so negative x and positive y. So sine will be negative because y is negative. Don't forget r is always positive. Cos will be negative. No, I take that back. Sine will be positive because y is positive. Because negative x is negative, cos will be negative, and because x is negative, tan will be negative. So the only thing that's positive here is sine. So everything or all is positive here. Sine is positive here. Here, let's go to quadrant 4. I'm going to have positive x, negative y. So anything with a y in it's going to be negative. So that's negative. That's negative. Only cos is positive because I have positive over positive. And that leaves tan here, which is going to be, because this is negative x and negative y, I have both negatives, and so tan is then going to be positive here, because negative over negative is a positive. So that, and that's how you get cast, C-A-S-T. What's positive in the quadrants? In quadrant 1, all. In quadrant 2, sine. 3, it's tan, and then in 4, it's cos. So we call this cast. I don't know, it looks good, I guess. So we starts here and it goes like this. Cast. Please don't write C here. It's C-A-S-T. So what's that mean? Well, let's look at let's figure out some ratios, and then we'll use that to find the answers to some of these questions like this. So from your question, it's in sine a half. Where's sine a half? What is theta? So sine of theta is a half. And we look at it says in your note, don't use a calculator, which means use your chart. So when you look at your table, from the table, I found out from the table that sine theta is a half. So sine theta is equal to half, when from the table, theta is equal to, was it 30 degrees? Yes, 30 degrees. So that's great. And that's one of the answers. But sine theta, sine is positive in this quadrant and this quadrant. So it's positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So this is my 30 is in quadrant 1. So I got to figure out what's my answer in quadrant 2. And it's really simple. All I do is I go back to the 180, this thing here, to figure out what the answer is in the other quadrant. So this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. If I take my answer to quadrant 2, I want to figure out what the answer is in quadrant 2, I just go 180 minus theta is equal to my answer, and it's 180 minus 30, and then I get 150. So my answer is, my two angles that have a sine of 1/2 are 30 in quadrant 1, and in quadrant 2, 150 degrees. Okay, so those are related angles. We can go further. I'll skip the next one, but I'll go to the third one because it has a negative involved. So if you look at your note, it says, when is cos equal to negative this, 1/2. Check your table, and tables don't have any negatives, but they do have something. Well, actually, let's take this a little slower. If I look here, the cos is positive in 1 and 4. It's negative then in 2 and 3. So my answers are in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Now, if I look at my table, I don't have any negatives, but I do have the fact that cos of 45 degrees is equal to 1/√2. And cos of 45 degrees is 1/√2. 45 degrees is in quadrant 1. So I just take my answer and I move it to my answer of, so here cos theta is equal to 1/√2, just a positive, if theta is equal to 45 degrees. Now take your answers and move them to the second and third quadrant where they're supposed to be. And that's 180 subtract 45. That's 135, and that's 180 plus 45, which is 2 1/4, or 225. Okay, so figure out what quadrant you're supposed to be in. Figure out the angle in the first quadrant. That might be one of your answers. If it's not one of your answers, then you're going to have to move to the quadrants at either 2 and 3 or whatever. You're going to have to move to the other two quadrants where the answer is. And to do that, you're going to have to use the related angle equations, which again, like I said, you will have on your summary sheet or your cheat sheet. Okay, and that's that. The only thing we're going to add after that really is the last little bit is, if I don't know, if I just make something up here, So for example, let's do this right now. Let's come up with some angles. So the last question is that tan is this. So tan theta is this. And this isn't an exact answer. Okay, so this is not a table answer. It's it's not going to be 40 and 30 and 45 and 30 and 60. It's just some answer. And I think the answer is related to 16 somehow. So I have negative. I just want to be careful. Negative this. So this tan is y over x. And there are two answers to this. And we got to figure out what quadrants we're in for these answers. Well, tan, let's figure this out first. Tan is positive here and here, so it's negative here and here. So my answers are going to be in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. So let's see if that makes sense. Well, tan is equal to y over x. So I can either have, I have negative 7 over 24. So either y is negative or x is negative, right? If I have a negative fraction, I can make the top negative or the bottom negative. So if I make the top negative, I'm going to have a point of 24 and negative 7. So my y is negative 7, and my x is positive, so positive 24. So let's see where that is. That's negative 7 plus 24. So this is my Q2. I end up in quadrant number 2. So I'm over here somewhere. Okay, so that gets me into quadrant 2. The other one should get me into quadrant 4, hopefully. And let's see if that's true. If I go 24 and 7 and I make the negative the 24, then what happens is I go negative 24. Sorry, negative. Did I mess this up? I did mess this up. So I wish I could rewind, but I can't right now. So what I'll do is I'll look at this right here and I'll say, look, this is the magic of, pretend you didn't see this. Minus 24 and 7 gets me to quadrant 2. I go over this way and here. But now, okay, so that's my quadrant 2. If I put the negative here, I go plus 24 minus 7. I end up in quadrant 4. Okay, so sorry about that. But now I end up in quadrant 4. So those are my two answers here. If I want to figure out the other trig ratios, what I could do is figure out what r is. And I think it's 25. You just get the square root of 24 squared plus the square root of 7 squared to get 25, and then work your way through it. But I'll leave that for later, and because this video is getting a little long. And so what I'm going to do now is just to finish this off, is if I have tan theta is equal to negative 7 over 24, I don't really want to put this negative in there. It will get confusing. So what I tend to do is I get rid of this, and then I use my calculator and say, okay, tan theta is equal to 7 over 24, and this will give my related angle in the first quadrant, and then I'll move it to the quadrants where I want it, quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. So I throw this in the calculator, 7 over 24, second function tan, I get 16 degrees. So that's in the first quadrant. I need to move my answer to the quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. So I go 180 subtract 16 to get me into quadrant, that's right. 180 subtract 16 to get 164 in quadrant 2. And the way to get to quadrant 4 is to take 316 subtract 16. So my angle here will be, what, 344. So those are the angles, 344, I don't even know what that is anymore, 164. And that's about it. Okay, so that's the cast law. That's a lot of stuff there. Take your time with the homework. You may be confused. I'm confused a little bit. I'm often confused, though, so that's not new for me. And that's about it. Okay, good luck, and ask questions in class if you're confused.